Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to offer dana, then please do go to justthiszen.org/giving. Your support really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. It's so lovely to sit with you this morning. I've recently I've been thinking a lot about legacy and what gets carried forward and what gets left behind. And I think that's probably catalysed by both aging and becoming a great grandmother for the second time. So that sense of what's behind and what's coming forward is, it's very engaging for me at the moment. And in my general internet tooling around, I came across, for me, a really, really deeply awe-inspiring and provocative piece of artwork by a multimedia Vietnamese artist called Tuan Andrew Nguyen. And it's called The Light That Shines Through the Universe. And I don't know if any of you will be at all familiar with his work, but he was born in Vietnam in 1976, at the end of that desperate 20-year war that wreaked havoc in his country and has carried on wreaking havoc. And when he was 3, his family fled by boat, leaving the devastation behind. And they first of all went to a refugee camp in Malaysia and then on to America, where they settled in Oklahoma. And I'm kind of always amazed by people's journeys and just that thought of this little Vietnamese family from the lushness of Vietnam finding themselves in Oklahoma. And he says that there's quite a lot of writing about him and him talking that, the family had packed up photographs in a plastic bag envelope to try and take them away with them, but through so many kind of sodden, dangerous journeys, the photographs all got lost. So they arrived in Oklahoma with no memories. And he studied, learned English, and did an MA, and then he returned to live in Ho Chi Minh City after he'd finished his MA. So, as a displaced person from a war-torn, colonised country, his journey has been about memory and history and belonging and the legacy of violence and trauma. And he said, I wanted to return to Vietnam to liberate myself from this idea of home that I could never grasp while I was growing up in the US. Now I think there is no home, which is really interesting to think about, when our phrase that so many of us use, that we're all walking each other home. And then it's like, well, what does it mean? What does home mean? So that's, anyway, another whole rabbit hole to go down. But the piece of work that really captivated me is a 25-foot sandstone Buddha that he has made with the people who work with him, with metal arms that aren't actually attached to the Buddha, and it's situated on the New York High Line Park, which is a park that runs on a disused rail line. The High Line Park, it's about 30 feet above the incredible busyness and bustle of New York. And the piece is directly inspired by the now destroyed monumental Buddhas known as the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan. And just these statues, the original statues, were 125 feet and 180 feet high. And they were made around in late 500s, early 600s CE, a common era way of talking about time that's not Christian. And just that, like, in 600 CE, how were they creating something 180 feet high? And they were carved in niches into the rock. So they weren't freestanding, they were carved in these niches. And they were on the Silk Road, so they were there looking over the journeys that people were making across vast distances on the Silk Road, and they were there for centuries. Over time, they were attacked, eroded by time, and then in 2001, they were completely destroyed by the Taliban. And the name of his work, The Light That Shines Through the Word, comes from the affectionate nickname of the local people for the largest, the taller Buddha, which was Sal, the light that shines through the world. And the body was carved out of sandstone, and the beautiful hands, which are held separate, are cast from melted down brass artillery shells from Afghanistan and Vietnam. And each hand is positioned into a mudra, one of which is the Abhaya mudra, signifying fearlessness, and the other is the Virada mudra, signifying compassion. And they're so beautiful. So what I wanted to do was just share with you a 7-minute video, because he talks about it in such a way that I think it speaks more eloquently than I could ever say, and then I want to weave that in with some koans. So this is the piece I want to share.
Art history, or history, human history, is a discovery of all the objects that we've left behind. The objects are trying to tell us a story. And I think that's fascinating. Yeah. What do the objects that have been destroyed tell us? What kind of stories do those tell us? The light that shines through the universe is a monument to absence. It's an attempt at reproducing something that's not there anymore. There's a long history of statuary that has been destroyed for different political and religious reasons. I remember quite clearly, I was actually just out of college and seeing the news, and it was the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas by the Taliban in 2001. I've been working in this region in Vietnam called Quang Tri. It's one of the most bombed regions on earth. Like 3 times the amount of ordnance was used during that war than in World War I and World War II combined. A lot of the munitions didn't explode when they were supposed to. So Quang Tri has been suffering from the after effects of war. So at the chance of making something monumental, I couldn't help but return to that moment the Bamiyan Buddhas were destroyed and kind of overlap it with my current research in Quang Tri. What I've learned from working with different communities that have suffered through war is that transformation is crucial. How do you transform trauma into hope? And that kind of transformation plays out materially in how we use the relics and the remnants from war, So we've transformed the artillery shells into hand gestures, mudras, that express fearlessness and compassion.
I think one of the most striking features will be the contrast between the sculpture and the surrounding urban landscape. The location where the spur and the plinth is located is surrounded by very shiny new towers that are covered with glass and reflective surfaces. Everything around there looks almost silver or gray. It doesn't have any sort of human tones to the palette, and I think actually this sculpture will have the power of kind of disrupting and kind of challenging also the language of the city out there. I think it will stand as this incredibly powerful icon and monument that will create this sort of friction with the city, because it will introduce a sort of recognizable image, but also an image that might feel out of place in that specific location.
It was important for me to use sandstone. Stone carries meaning. There's a kind of long history to the use of stone. And I tried to push the monument as big as I possibly could. We were given a maximum weight of 50 tons that we could not go over. The monument sits at a little bit under 50 tons. It was very challenging to work at this scale. I had never worked at this scale before. I'd never worked with stone before. There's 4 slabs of stone, each about 2 meters high. So moving these slabs of stone around was no easy task. The hands were cast from a mix of artillery brass that we managed to get from Afghanistan. The process of getting artillery brass from Afghanistan across the border to Pakistan, and then from Pakistan to Vietnam, was also quite challenging. It was actually very exciting to figure that out. We also mixed it with artillery brass that we found in Vietnam as well. So there's a kind of interaction there that happens.
With Tuan's piece in particular, just looking at that piece in the evening looks so different than at daybreak, when the sun is crossing the eastern sky and it's beginning to reflect on those hands of fearlessness and compassion. And for me, at a time when the world seems broken and dark and angry and bitter, Tuan's piece reminds us that light can slip through even the smallest crack, and when it does, it illuminates that space. And I hope that people remind themselves that joy and art are forms of resistance. And if coming up 30 feet onto the High Line to experience this piece gives someone a sense of peace and a sense of renewal, to get back into the fight again, then I think public art is doing exactly what it's intended to do.
So I found it a really profound piece of art because of that stretching across time. You know, here he is referencing something that was there I don't know how they began to make something like that 600 years ago, in 600 CE. And so I'm just kind of really curious about how we hold time. And then I read this piece, arising from stillness, carry out activities without hesitation. This moment is the koan. When practice and realization are without complexity, then this koan is the present moment. That which is before any trace arises, the scenery on the other side of time's destruction. The scenery on the other side of time's destruction, the activity of all Buddhas and awakened ancestors, is just this one thing. That's from Zazen Yojinki. And I love that phrase, the other side of time's destruction. You know, what gets destroyed, what gets transmuted, what gets metabolized. And we live in a closed ecosystem. Our planet moves around in a closed ecosystem. And the water in your glass, you know, the water you might have been drinking this morning, is the same water that existed at the beginning of time on the earth. You know, dinosaurs have drunk the water you're drinking. You know, insects, fish, birds, humans, for the last billions of years. And it passes through our bodies. And it'll be passing through the bodies of people to come. And after reading, looking at those statues, I was sort of I was imagining that a particle of dust from one of those Bamiyan Buddhas may well be some of the dust that I personally don't dust in our house. It's like nothing goes away. So there's something about that, is destruction possible? What does that mean? What gets lost? What gets carried forward? And then there's this koan from Case 29 from the Blue Cliff Record, and it's called Daizu's Kalpa Fire. And in this koan, a monk asked his teacher, Daizu, in the raging of the Kalpa fire, which signifies the end of a whole era. So Kalpa fire is like apocalypse, it's the end times. Chiliocosms, which is one of the Hindu ways of measuring time, are together destroyed. I wonder if this is destroyed and not destroyed. And Daizu responds, destroyed. The monk continues, if so, does everything go with it? And Daizu answers, everything goes with it. So if this is destroyed, is everything destroyed? Yes, everything is destroyed. And then, in the wonderful way of our practice, the deep koans and the paradoxes that we live with, there's another koan, which is found in Case 30. So, another monk later asks another teacher, Ryushu, the same question. And Ryushu says, not destroyed. And when the monk asks, why is it not destroyed? Ryushu replies, because it is the same as the Chiliocosms. It is the same as the universe. Just this, is the same as the universe. So according to Daizu, everything is destroyed in the great apocalyptic Kalpa fire and nothing remains. According to Ryushu, it's not destroyed because it cannot cease being everything. It's always the complete universe. The destroyed universe is the complete universe. So, and I find myself asking, are the great Buddhas of Bamiyan, are they destroyed or not destroyed? Does a modern day echo of them 30 feet above New York invoke and evoke their ancient present? Do the gleaming hands made of death, symbolizing fearlessness and compassion, when they have been made of fear and hatred and violence? Do they carry forward peace and hope? In these transformations, is the trauma transformed? One of my favourite words at the moment is metabolized. You know, do things get metabolized more than they get transformed? And then I was thinking a lot about, you know, what things have detonated in your own lives, you know, in my life, what things have blown up the world as I know it, and what's happened with those, what's happened with that. And when our daughter was seeing someone of extremely dubious character, we were being woken in the night fairly frequently, either by the dubious character or by the police looking for the dubious character. And my response, one of my many responses, was I bought myself the most beautiful material I could find, and I made a dressing gown. Because I thought, if I'm going to go down to the door, I'm going to go in something I've created. You know, there was something about having agency and all of that. So I was trying to take these, you know, detonating, devastating experiences and literally making something out of it. And it made me, you know, really curious about, you know, what have you made? And I don't mean physically, but like, what have you made out of devastating events in your life, detonations that have gone off? And I was really touched the other day. I went round to my daughter's house, and you know, more than 30 years later, that dressing gown was hanging on the back of her bathroom door, and it's still there, and a kind of outcome that was unimaginable to me at that time, that this thing that I'd made would be carried forward as a loveliness, not just about the devastation. So then I'm kind of thinking about, how do we sit with, you know, flux, with impermanence, with creation and destruction? And I went back to the quote from Tuan Andrew, where he says, I wanted to return to Vietnam to liberate myself from this idea of home that I could never grasp while I was growing up in the US, and now I think there's no home. So if we can liberate ourselves from a home that doesn't actually exist, and yet in our Sangha and our practice be walking each other home, and we can find places to grieve for the destruction of our, you know, our precious planet and the wanton greed that's chewing through our limited resources, and yet somehow have faith that there is no ultimate destruction, and everything that can be remade as things of worth and beauty, then what happens in our experience of our lives? You know, how have we, all of us, met the different detonations in our lives, you know, emotionally, physically, socially, professionally? What have we made? What have we made out of that? How does the detonation carry forward? And there's a really short haiku by a beautiful Japanese poet, Issa, and he wrote it on the death of his child. He says, dew evaporates, and all our world is dew, so dear, so fresh, so fleeting. All the world is dew, so dear, so fresh, so fleeting. And just this morning from Rosemary Watola Troma, she says, pouring time into the shape of this question, how do I serve life? Pouring time into the shape, our shape, this tiny moment in time that we walk through life together. Norman Fisher says in his book, No Beginning, No Ending, No Fear, if no beginning, then no ending. There is no death. In what we call death, the body does not disappear. It continues its journey forth. Not a single element is lost. The body simply transforms into air and water and earth and sky. Our mind travels on too. Its passions, fears, loves and energies continue on throughout this universe. Because we have lived, the world is otherwise than it would have been. And the energy of our life's activities travel onward, circulates, joins and rejoins others to make the world of the future. And there is no death, there is only continuation. There's nothing to be afraid of. Even when the world is destroyed, it's indestructible. So those have been kind of my thoughts around time, legacy, what moves forward, how nothing can ever be lost. And there was a poem by Mark Nieper. It's called Covenants of Aliveness. And there are spiritual laws that no one can avoid or completely understand. How darkness makes its holes for light to fill. How 2 steps forward, 1 step back is the way of healing. How giving freely softens us enough to receive. How surrender flows into the basin of acceptance. How showing up re-threads us into the web of kinship. How life along the way twigs the heart into a nest. The light that shines through the universe. And how darkness makes the holes for the light to fill. So here we all are, sitting, seeing each other in the light that shines through the universe and being the light that shines through the universe for each other. Thank you all so much for being here.